Welcome to Reroute Reflections, a podcast about what it really takes to change direction with intention. Around here, we believe change works better when we take the time to reflect and, when necessary, reroute. We're here to challenge assumptions, share stories, and discuss the tools that can help us navigate change with confidence.
Welcome, Season 2, Episode 1.
I didn't think we were going to come back. I don't know about you.
I know. It's been a full year since we last posted an episode.
Yes, it is June 26th. I think the last published episode was June 24th, 2024. Exactly.
But I think a lot has changed for you, for me. We've had lots going on in the last year or so. And I think with that, we've done our own reflecting about what you want the direction of the podcast to be. And we've kind of rerouted things a little bit ourselves to make some new content for the year.
Yeah, I think it's been a crazy year, a really exciting year for us, for me, for the business. And I'm really excited to dive into that and talk just a little bit about, to just kind of get a little bit more structure to kind of like our podcast and how, we want to go about this next season. I think the first season was really us getting our footing. I think you were still kind of finishing up school and, kind of on your path of becoming a dietitian. You've obviously now become a dietitian, a full-fledged RD. Huge congratulations on that. And so you were kicking off your career. And so obviously, I think one of the things I need to do a better job of still is, like, as you start to say yes to things, you need to kind of like take stock and say, okay, what am I I'm going to say yes to one more thing. What do I say no to? And I think that's kind of where we're at, and said, okay, well, if you're going to kind of dive into that, focus, I'll put both your feet into that, trying to start your career up. What do we say no to? And that was kind of like the podcast. I had to take a little bit of a backseat, but we always knew or at least I always knew that I wanted to do this again. So I'm glad we finally did it. And we're also live, like faces. Hello, everybody. So we're going to be doing some recordings for these moving forward. So you get to kind of see our faces and our expression and how much we read our scripts. How much we actually talk, just from our minds. So I'm looking forward to that. It was something that I wanted to do in season 1, but yeah, I'm glad we were doing it for season 2. So you can probably, I don't know where this is going to be. I think it's going to be YouTube. So Reroute Consulting has a YouTube page. We'll put that in the show notes, so you get a chance to see it. But it will be on our YouTube channel, so that you can see us or listen to us, whatever floats your boat, or do both if you just can't get enough, I guess is the way to go.
Yeah. And I think, what we're going to be doing a little differently with this season is focusing more on interviewing people like plus ourselves, having guests with you, and really talking more about how change impacts everybody from like a professional and personal standpoint. Because I think we hinted at it a lot last season, and that's kind of what we're really getting to, is that change happens for everybody on different levels. And I think for you as a change manager, part of the difference between your company and others is that you really like to focus on that individuality when it comes to change as people. And so I think what we'd like to focus on now is just understanding different perspectives of change from different professionals. So me as a dietitian, how change impacts people from my perspective, whether it's with personal trainers, interior designers, project managers, contractors, change managers, like everyone is trying to deal with change in some way. And I think it will all make us better at our jobs if we can learn more perspectives, right? To really understand how it's impacting different facets of life.
I love that. I love that. I think it's really important. I think one of the things as change managers, like, and I think everyone has an element of change management, within their jobs. And so trying to like surface, what works well in like these different situations may help us, right, improve. Because, I think change management, while it is a profession, in and of itself, it is always kind of geared towards the business setting. It's like, how are we managing change for, a project and seeing it as a project when it's not really a project. We're talking about, changing behaviors of individuals, but like, what can we learn from areas of wellness, mental health, psychology, from marketing, yourself as a dietitian, trying to get people to stop eating those Oreos, is
Nothing
super.
wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with Oreos. I just couldn't think of anything else, and I also really want an Oreo. But I think just breaking down those silos, which is always so interesting to me because change management is all about breaking down silos, and yet we create so many of them. Just but in terms of like the frameworks that we use, it's like, oh my God, I must use ProSci. If I don't use ProSci, like I'm never going to be able to manage change effectively. And nothing else matters as long as I'm following ADCAR, everything will be okay.
Yeah.
Or whether it's lean change or what have you. It's like we create all these you know these silos that just restrict ourselves. And I just don't understand it. Like we do need to take a look at ourselves and say, listen, we're not going to have all the answers, and that's okay. Why restrict yourself to one framework? Why restrict yourself to like how one profession handles managing change? At the end of the day, we're all people, and how you manage change with your patients could give me ideas on how I can manage change with professionals.
Mhm.
And vice versa. Like how somebody gets, a personal trainer gets somebody to, stick to a regimen. We can all use that because at the end of the day, there's one commonality amongst all of us, and that's the people. Let's just focus on the people. Let's not think about it like a project. It's not a project. We are human beings. Let's insert a little bit of empathy and expand our capabilities based on all of these really bright people that are out there that are managing change every single day, just maybe not in ways that we thought, you know, or we looked at before. So let's expand our minds. So
Yeah.
let's do that. And yeah, I'm really excited about interviewing some folks. We already have some really interesting guests that I've got planned. I haven't reached out to them, but you probably know who you are. A big thank you to all of you for coming back and listening to us again. I know it's been a long time, and for all you new listeners that are out there, thank you for um, downloading this episode. And I'm really excited to have you all on board. Um, I think one of the things that we will be introducing is this element of like what is happening in the real world. So we do want to bring out or bring together some cases, things that are like out in the wild, I guess right now. Change in the wild, I think will be a really good segment for us. So whether that's like news that's coming out, like some changes that are happening that we're hearing about in organizations, or just in the economy, or where we live. So in Canada, in the United States, or Europe, depending on who our guests are. It'd be really interesting to kind of dissect, some of the changes that are happening all around the world, or even just cases that have happened within my practice, and changes that I'm managing with clients. But then getting different perspectives, from yourself as a dietitian having to deal with, changing behavior on a daily. Maybe we get some professionals out there who've dealt with change in other areas that might also be helpful. So definitely wanting to bring in kind of that real world lens to what we're doing here, so that we can actually apply all the insights that we're learning. So that is a little bit of a sneak peek as to what season 2 will bring. As always, we're nothing without the listeners. And so if you guys have any ideas or situations that you're dealing with right now that you want us to go through live during the podcast, please send them to us. You can contact me directly on through my website, so rerouteconsulting.com. You can also email me at andrew@rerouteconsulting.com as well, with any ideas that you have for the podcast.
Yeah. So with that, why don't we start with some reintroductions about us, who we are, why we're talking about change, and just like our background. If people haven't heard from us before, who are we?
Cool. I'll go first. So my name is Andrew Orique. I am a principal consultant and founder at Reroute Consulting. Started the business about 3 years ago. Right now, my clients are primarily in North America, so Canada and the United States. I've worked on various levels of changes across various industries, from financial services, healthcare, um, engineering firms. Oh my God, I can't even think about it. So many different ones. I think I'm probably missing a few nonprofits. And so got a lot of experience with handling change in different types of people. And I think that's what's gotten me so interested in this topic that we're going to be diving into during this season, which is like, how do we bring these different perspectives on how to manage change? Because I've seen how different people, different types of organization approach change differently, and always has kept me on my toes. And so I feel like we're just missing a piece of the puzzle here, and I'm hoping that through the conversations we have this season, they can selfishly maybe help me manage change a little bit better, and hopefully help all of you too.
Yeah. I'm Becca or Reek, or Rebecca, whatever. I prefer Becca. A little less formal, a little more fun. I am a registered dietitian working in Ontario. Um, I have lots of experience in clinical, so working in hospital. Well, I say lots, but really it was just about it's a year and a half kind of right now. Um, Primarily working in oncology, so with cancer patients. But right now I am just in a casual position, so I'm helping to cover where it's needed for vacations and things like that. Um, for the summer, I'm focusing more on sport nutrition. So I've got lots of different contracts going on right now with sport, mostly with different kinds of provincial teams, helping to do education workshops, kitchen sessions, kind of teaching some of the younger developmental athletes how to work in a kitchen, what kind of recipes to focus on, attending different kinds of camps to provide in person, kind of real time nutrition support. And then I also do a lot of one on one work with more of our targeted athletes, um, to help them really improve their performance level, with different kinds of sports. So that is keeping me very busy right now, which is more fun for the summer, more fun than working in a hospital. As much as I love it, it's just a completely different lens to be able to focus on. And I think with that, a lot of my job is focused on change behavior. So whether it's with athletes who are at kind of like their peak health already and helping them make more fine-tuned changes with their nutrition to help them really see an impact to their performance and their skill level. It's all about them making those little tweaks to their behavior. And then on the flip side, working in hospital, people typically are coming in with, new diagnosis, different kinds of diseases that are almost forcing them to kind of look at changing things in their life for health improvement. So helping them navigate that as well. And that's kind of a whole different thing too. So you get to experience change from two different perspectives, at least with the work that I'm doing right now. And it can be very rewarding, but it's also very challenging when perhaps you have people who don't really want to change or they don't understand how to change and just trying to figure out how at an individual level it's going to work best for them.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. I say we get right into it. And I think one
Yeah.
of the things that we wanted to kind of just talk through, and maybe for listeners, and this is still very, new. So we're not really sure whether listeners come in are all like change managers. But just given, that it's Reroute Consulting and Reroute Reflections is tied, let's assume a good chunk are familiar with the change frameworks and, methodologies that are out there from a business standpoint.
Hmm.
ProSci, Cotter, um, ProSci, Cotter, and Lean Change are kind of the three that I always refer to. We can maybe put a link in the show notes. I had done a webinar a month ago, I think, with ACMP Ontario talking about all of those different approaches. So I'll pop a link to that webinar if you're all interested in that to learn more. But what I would actually like to learn more about, because I actually don't know a lot about it, is, and I'm sure this will be new for most, it's just like what are some of the change frameworks, or like how do you manage behavioral change like as a dietitian, like in a healthcare setting? I feel like that would be really interesting selfishly for me to hear more about.
Yeah, I think, I, as part of my education to become a dietitian, Not only do we learn about different health behavior change like frameworks within our undergrad, but a lot of my master's program was focused on this as well. I think we had an entire class about different change behavior models and having to implement them for a change for ourselves to see how not only the change model works in real life, but also just how difficult it can still be, even with following a framework. And similarly to you, I think also trying to find the right one that works with the right person at the right time, at the right place. So I feel like sometimes it seems fairly straightforward to people with changing something nutrition wise or with their hydration. But behind everything, you really have to take into consideration a few of these frameworks to figure out what's going to work best for certain people and also what different factors or barriers are at play. So I think the one that comes to kind of top of mind that we talk a lot about in school is like the determinants of health. So really understanding it's like that, it's like a circle that's like within bigger circles. And within that middle circle is kind of like different constitutional factors that don't necessarily change. So like age, gender, things like that. Yeah.
We'll pop this on the screen for
Yes.
YouTube. So if you are listening to the podcast, we'll have a copy of this so Becca, feel free to like actually talk to it.
Okay. Yeah.
And knowing that it's actually on the screen for everyone.
Yeah. Then outside of that kind of core, you've got things like individual lifestyle factors. Then you've got things like your um, social social and community networks. Um, and so I think the reason this kind of ties into nutrition is because we need to really look at those core values and core beliefs first to understand if people are even ready for a change. And then what are all the things within those kind of like outward networks and outward factors that are also impacting their ability to make change? Um, and figuring out how we can like kind of overcome those barriers or use them to our advantage.
Mhm.
Um,
I like that idea of like trying to bring it and I think that's one of the things that change management tries to do, like in a business setting, which is always talking about how do we bring this down to the individual level, very pro sci esque. Um, and I think for you, that's exactly what you need to do, right? You do need to focus at the individual level because you are dealing with the individual.
yeah,
And so how do you do that? I think has always been the gap for change management because we always are dealing with more than one person. We're dealing with like hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. But I think that focus of like, you know, there are these determinants of like what's going to encourage somebody to change and like, you know, the community around them, their friends, their family,
mhm,
all of that is stuff that we sometimes miss around like because we just tend to focus like what's happening on the work side of things, you know, but there's
right.
all these other things around them, right? So I definitely see how that aligns really well with the way that we need to think about change.
Yeah. And I find this one's more applicable for me in terms of sports that are maybe um, sports where they're working with partners. So with like volleyball, for example, they're typically in pairs, or even in sports that are more, I guess, like aesthetically inclined. So by that I mean where body image might be more of an issue, or like weight class sports, or things like that. Because at the core of like a kind of social determinants of health or like socio-ecological model is like the knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors that people have about themselves or about other people. And right now, for example, I'm working with beach volleyball a lot, and with both males and females, they're typically in like bathing suits. But at the same time, we also need to make sure they're fueling themselves enough to get through like a really hot, humid day on the beach, competitions. They're, outside exercising for 3 days straight sometimes. And that can be really challenging because a lot of the athletes are so health focused and so focused on a specific weight or the way they're going to look in their bathing suit that they're almost hesitant to eat too much or to even just eat enough to fuel their performance. So I find this kind of framework comes into play a lot with those kind of sports because when I'm doing education sessions with them as a group, or attending camps with them, we really focus a lot on body image and the difference between a high performance athlete and, someone who may not make it is really understanding that different bodies are different bodies. Like everyone's going to look differently, and you really need to take your health seriously above just looking a certain way in order to get to the top of your sport.
Mm. And as soon as you're talking about that, I immediately start thinking about like, because in business we see that all the time too. Like you're understanding like the image as well as the that making you not want to fuel yourself as much because of you being self conscious about the way that your body looks totally makes sense. But also with the overall like goal of like you doing well in your sport, they kind of conflict. And in business, I see
Mhm.
that all the time when it comes to individuals development and goals against like the overall business benefits, which oftentimes will conflict as well with one another. An individual wants to grow at a certain pace, but the business can't necessarily accommodate that for whatever reason. And so, how do you find a way to balance those two goals together where they're aligned is really hard to do. And it almost, again, just emphasizes this need of like trying to find a way to help manage the individual that's going through the change because for everyone, that's going to be different.
Yeah. And I think this kind of ties a little bit into like the next model that I typically look at when thinking about behavior change is it's called the health belief model. This one's
Mhm.
more of kind of like, boxes with arrows and kind of leading to different pathways. But the whole idea of this is really understanding people's perceptions. So whether it's their perception of being diagnosed with a disease or their perception of avoiding illness or wanting to get better, their perception of how severe things are for them, and whether that's actually going to encourage them to make a change, whether they're perceiving kind of like the benefits and the risks in different ways.
Mhm.
And then kind of what their cue to action is. And then just like the self efficacy piece or like the autonomy of being ready to take those things on and kind of work to change their perceptions a little bit is all going to impact their likelihood of being able to take that action. So I guess as like an example, working in oncology, of course, being diagnosed with a different cancer can be perceived in different ways, depending on what kind of cancer it is, right? Every cancer is terrible, every cancer is bad. But I also think that with the media and the way that different things are kind of perceived by the public now, let's say being diagnosed with breast cancer versus pancreatic cancer, I think the first thing that comes to mind with people is that pancreatic cancer is immediately kind of like a terrible, oh, there's like no
Mhm.
cure for this. It's going to be horrible. It gets diagnosed typically very late in the game. Whereas with breast cancer, we all know there's been tons of more research, a lot more like advancements in the treatment options, and most people will survive longer with breast cancer versus pancreatic. So
Right.
it's kind of understanding when you're talking to a patient who's got these different diagnoses, like what is their perception of their disease that they have, and how is that going to either hold them back or help their trajectory with wanting to make nutrition and lifestyle changes to help with their diagnosis. So that's like a little bit. I mean, you could go through the whole thing with the health belief model of those different perceptions that come into play, but hopefully that kind of makes sense where you're now dealing one on one with the individual about what their beliefs are and the
Mhm.
way they perceive things in their life.
Yeah.
And if they see an action that's going to be very hard or not going to give them the benefits they want, then they're going to be less likely to do it. So, how do we overcome those things and help almost change their minds about different things so that they're motivated to want to change?
As we're talking about this, I'm curious about like some of the recommendations that these models provide to you as a dietitian to like deal with certain things that come up for individuals. I think in change management in an organizational standpoint, you're touching on like one of the more difficult elements, which is this desire to change, right?
Yeah.
And I don't usually relate so much to pro sci. I feel like that's all I'm talking about here. But let's add Cotter into the mix, like the sense of urgency that Cotter talks about in his change model, which is I think they refer to as kind of the burning platform, which is like, in order to change effectively, people need to feel like they're on a burning platform, which I think comes from like an
Mhm.
oil rig that's caught on fire, and this idea of like, unless you feel like you're on that burning platform, there is no desire to change. And so, how do you build that desire for a business situation, right, where people feel like the sense of urgency and motivation to do something when you have struggles having to deal with this type of change, when literally someone's life is hanging in the balance, and yet you guys struggle with trying to figure out how to change their behavior. Is there any like Are there any ideas that come out of that model that, if you, let's say you have a patient who's been diagnosed with something like cancer, and they feel like they just still don't want to change? Does this model provide you with some guidance on like how to, deal with those types of situations?
I mean, I guess that's the hard part about following different frameworks. And I think you talked about this in your webinar as well, is no one framework is going to be like the perfect guideline on how to deal with change for one person. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, I think in both of our jobs, we're using these kind of frameworks to try and guide us in making changes easier for people, or to try and understand the behavior change that needs to happen from a more like theoretical standpoint.
Yeah.
But I'm at the end of the day, it's also just about understanding as someone who works in change that sometimes people aren't going to want to do it. And that's not up to us, right? Like people are all individuals. They have the autonomy to decide if they want to do something or not.
Yeah.
And I can't force them to eat certain foods. I can't force them to make a change if they're not ready to do it. But
Mhm.
I think in those kind of situations, I provide, empathy and understanding that maybe they're not ready to make these changes and that's totally their choice. They can do what they want. It's their own health, right? And
Yeah.
trying to just work on building a rapport, which is hard to do in a business setting. But I think in my work, at least, that's where it comes in more to play, is building that relationship with people so that the more they are willing to just listen and the more that they're willing to work with you in whatever capacity that is that they're ready, hoping that eventually they're going to make the right choices for themselves. And if
Yeah.
that choice at the end of the day is not taking change, then like I said, that's their choice, right? But I think that's maybe the piece that people don't understand about working in change industries like this, whether it's personal training or nutrition or change management in a business setting, is we're not here to force changes upon you. We're here to try and give you the guidelines and the tools and the resources to make change a little bit easier.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, that individual is still responsible for their own goal setting, for actually taking the action necessary to make something happen.
I like that concept, right? And I think it's sometimes really hard for, and if you saw me looking at the other screen, I was trying to find a chart, which I'll will queue up to show in just a second. But I think when it comes to change management, at least, and maybe it's just me, but you do find, or at least I find, that your goal is always trying to get like everyone to come on board with you. And I
Mhm.
think, and it's interesting because when you're dealing with an individual one on one, it seems like maybe the way that you're describing it, it's like it's easier for you to say like, you know what, like you got to meet me halfway. And if you don't meet me halfway, that's on you too. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
and it's funny because when I think about it as a change manager dealing with like hundreds of people, thousands that need to change, I'm like, I don't do that to myself. Like I don't say that. I'm not like, well, you got to meet me halfway, guys. I don't say that. And I'm like, what else could I have done to get this person to adopt this change more successfully? And I think as change managers, maybe we need to step back and think about it like there's just so much that we can do, right?
Yep.
And this comes from ACMP. This is the curve that they show when it comes to managing change just in general. And I know, Beck, you can't see it, but I'll explain it
I
so
know
you.
exactly which one you're talking about,
Yeah.
though. I've seen
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, like at the end of the day, this gap that we see between, an individual's kind of journey through change. At the end of the day, when the change happens, there is going to be this dip in, proficiency, performance that we're going to see in individuals. That's going to happen. But eventually, over time, whether we're involved or not, they're going to come on board with that change. In an organizational setting, at least, obviously from a healthcare perspective, somebody could choose not to follow guidance, but then that may lead to death or other illness and other injuries or what have you.
Mhm.
So that is kind of that end state. But if we think about, somebody who autonomously chooses that path, that right path, there is going to be kind of like this dip in like getting on the right track, but eventually they'll kind of build up and get and reach that desired state. I feel like where we come in as change professionals, yourself as a healthcare professional, myself as a a change manager, is that we can reduce the time it takes to get to that proficiency level, to get to that desired state. And as you can see in the chart, it's never like a perfect jump, right? And the degree to which we can close that gap is going to vary in terms of our effectiveness as change leaders. And I always like to think back at Henry Mintzberger, fellow Canadian in Quebec, professor at McGill. He came up with this model around leadership that I think really applies to change management, or change leadership in general, which is this idea that your effectiveness as a leader is a combination of your skill or your craft. It's an art and it is a science. So there's kind of this triangle, which we'll throw up on the screen as well. It's a combination of all three of these different things. The science is the frameworks that we were talking about, right? The craft is your skill in being able to do that based on your years of experience and what you've seen as a leader, and then the art comes in, the soft skills and your ability to kind of adapt and maybe break through just what science is telling you to do. And I feel like it's in kind of having those three things where you really can drive a successful change forward. So really, really interesting stuff. So thank you for that.
Of course. I feel like that kind of ties nicely into like the last framework that I'll kind of chat about. And hopefully everyone's a little bit more familiar with this, because I remember even with my first undergrad in kinesiology, like many, many years ago now, we still talked about this one. And with my most recent undergrad, we still talk about it today, almost 10 years later. But that's the stages of change. So, the pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance phases. I think this one comes into play a lot more than any of the other ones that I really talk about, because not only is it a lot more simple, but it also really helps you figure out where somebody's at and their like readiness to change. And I also like the idea that, people can kind of progress forward to next steps or maybe take a step back, like depending on what things happen for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think a lot of people who I interact with are either already in like that contemplation preparation phase where, especially in a hospital setting, they know that things likely are going to have to change for them, but they're not really sure how to take action on it. I do also see a lot of people who already are in the action step. So if they've been living with cancer for some time and they're coming in for another surgery, for example, typically they've already made tons of changes nutrition wise. But now it's about figuring out if that's working for them or not and what kind of tweaks they can make to better support their health. I think from a sport nutrition kind of perspective, a lot of the athletes I see tend to be in more of like the developmental sport phase. So they're kind of working up towards getting to the national level. And I think lots of them are more so in the pre-contemplation or contemplation phase, where this might be their first interaction with a nutrition support person. This might be their first time getting coaching in the gym, right? To help with their actual sport. And so they're not necessarily thinking about changing their behavior yet or what kind of benefits they can see. And so from that understanding, my job is now to help educate them on why they can make certain changes and what it's going to help do for them. But yeah, the stages of change is one that I use probably most frequently. in my practice right now.
Awesome. I love that. And I feel like we'll include all of these templates probably on LinkedIn, Instagram, so that you can see them in case you don't go to YouTube. But if you're on YouTube, you'll see them popped up as we're talking about it. So it might be a little bit clearer. Hopefully we did a good enough job explaining it for those listening on the podcast. Now, I think this is really great. I think would be, a good time for us to maybe like talk about kind of next steps in terms of like if you're listening to this, let's say you are a change manager, in a business setting, like what can you do next, or what would I do next, based on all of this. I think for me, I'm going to do some homework on this and take a look at some of these different frameworks and see how where there are similarities, where there are differences, and what can how can I incorporate some of these elements, into what I do when it makes the most sense. I recall back on yonder. I don't know why I said that. I remember I attended the change management conference in Chicago this year, a couple of months ago, and I found it really great. It was an ACMP run event. Really enjoyed it. It was great getting a chance to meet and talk to other change leaders out there. It was a great environment. I'm looking forward to next year, which I think is in Orlando. So I'm really looking forward to that. But anyway, when I was there, I took part in a session on storytelling, and I remember being like, I don't know about this. This seems a little weird. So how am I going to be able to do that? And I remember listening to like how we can approach change management and our change stories in more of a storytelling framework, and the power of stories and how they can really help to drive imagination and our ability to, you know, um, understand what is happening and what needs to happen and why it needs to happen now. And so I've started to, find opportunities to integrate that, just in terms of like, even just with my own context. And when I'm talking about like putting leaders or speakers notes together for leaders as they're, coming, or they're presenting an idea to their employees, it's like, how can I turn this into a story, use analogies more as a way to drive engagement. And so, it doesn't have to, like, these things don't need to reshape the way that you think about and how you manage or lead change. But if you can just add little pieces to your toolbox, to help you in these situations where it makes the most sense, I think it'll just make you stronger. And so for me, and what I recommend for everybody, is just taking a look at these different frameworks, see where there are similarities. As we were talking through it, I see where they can line up. And if some of the guidance that you're hearing from Pro Cotter, Lean, wherever, just doesn't really, do it for you, maybe some of these will help close the gap. And sometimes it's not, that Pro Cotter or Lean has missed anything. It's just maybe you just need to hear it a different way or see it a different way, and then that clicks lets the light bulb go off for you. And so it's just introducing it in different contexts, I think will be helpful for us. And I think that's really what our goal of this season is going to be, helping us think differently, breaking through the silos that we've arbitrarily created for ourselves. So this is great. Um,
Yeah. And I think
Anything you want to
kind of,
add there? Yeah.
yeah, I think thinking about my experience in becoming a dietitian, so we're required to do like an internship or have supervised practice hours before we can even sit to write our exam. And I think one of the most beneficial things of going through that time and being able to work with so many different kinds of dietitians is also just seeing how they navigate change or how they're having these conversations with people. Um, because it really gives you a better idea of like how you want to practice as a dietitian, and how do you want to incorporate those different kind of stories, how do you want to present information to people. It gives you like a really good idea of taking kind of best practices or leaving things behind that you think won't work for you. And so I think that's kind of the point of us talking about all these different change frameworks from different industries, is to give people the information to say, here's how I do things as a dietitian. Here's how you do things as a change manager. And then here's how like someone else is doing something in our next episode, right? And
Yeah.
so for the individuals listening to this, being able to pick and choose things that they think might work in their industry and leaving other things behind. And like you said, whether it's choosing from different change management frameworks or even coming to the nutrition side and picking things like the stage of change that you think might work in your industry, I think kind of opens the doors and opens people's minds to saying there isn't any one right way to do this or any wrong way to do this, but a lot of it's trial and error and figuring
Mhm.
things out. Yeah.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. Trial and error experimentation when you're dealing with people, that is the name of the game.
Yeah.
Um, So these next two, so we want to introduce kind of some like, recurring themes at the end as we kind of close. I think one of the things is that we're going to introduce is this segment called the change shelf. And so the idea is that our guests will get an opportunity or ourselves to introduce kind of a resource, a tool, maybe a book, article, or something that they've read that they think would be really helpful for people just to get a better understanding of some of the topics and ideas that we shared during the episode. So, Beck, do you have a resource that you would like to share or recommend to folks?
Yeah. So it was interesting because, on a side note, another one of the frameworks that we learned about in our program was kind of like a habit loop. And we'll pop it up on the screen too, where you kind of got a cue that is then going to instigate a behavior and result in a reward. And it kind of closes that loop then. And so it causes those kind of behaviors or habits to happen over and over again. And where this kind of comes from is actually the book Atomic Habits. It's by James Clear. And it really kind of breaks down and focuses on the power of making very small but incremental changes to your behavior in order to get you to those long-term goals that you have and to result in like long-term sustainable results. And I think the main things that kind of came out of that book for me were, focusing on making things very obvious, making your change attractive, keeping it easy, making it really satisfying. And I talk a lot about this in some presentations I do in terms of like nutrition foundations with athletes is it needs to be enjoyable and it needs to be the easy choice. Because if it isn't those things, yeah, you might be able to kind of force yourself to make a change for a week or two, but after that, it's likely not going to stick. And I think
Mm,
anyone who's tried to drastically change their diet by cutting out an entire food group, for example, will know exactly what I'm talking about, where you might be able to hold up with it for a few weeks, but then after a while, you start to realize this isn't sustainable. And so I think Atomic Habits really makes that clear. And it helps you kind of understand what that habit cycle looks like and how you can really disrupt it to make your goals happen and make your changes happen. So, highly
mm,
recommend. I feel like the last time I read it was probably a couple years ago at this point. So, maybe I'll even give it a reread just to kind of refresh my memory on it. But
mm.
that would be my change recommendation of the week, I guess.
I like that. I like that. Honestly, the element you talk about, just within like atomic habits, the habit loop, and even this idea of like, this trial and error thing, it's so fundamental to like how, I manage change at Reroute Consulting, which is this combination. And so Reroute is not just the name. I think a lot of people have kind of asked where the name come from, but it is embedded within how I manage change with clients. It's this concept of, you know, test and learn. So you test something out, you evaluate whether it's successful or not. You take what went well, you ditch what didn't, and you regroup and try to fill in the gap. And so that reroute concept is part of how we do things at Reroute Consulting and how we manage change with clients. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. You can't expect yourself unless you've got this crystal ball and able to read minds. You can't expect yourself to be able to, figure out what an individual needs, especially when you're dealing with, hundreds and or thousands of people. And
Mhm.
so the only thing you can do is try things out, see if they work, and if they don't, you adjust as you go, or in our case, reroute. And so the final segment is a standard question that we're going to be asking everyone on the podcast. which is, when is the last time that you yourself reroute something in your life? And so, as you are host slash guest of this episode, Becca, I'm going to ask you that question. So, when is the last time you had to reroute something in your life?
Um, Honestly, right now. So I feel like, I've been working specifically with like beach volleyball now for a few weeks. We're kind of gearing up into the summer, into competition season. And especially with the heat wave we just have had, I've been talking a ton about hydration and like maintaining your fluid status and athletes. But it also reminds me that, like, even for me going through a heat wave, I also need to make sure I'm drinking more water than normal. And to be honest, I don't drink enough as it is. So my baseline's already not there. So something I've been trying to reroute in my life right now is incorporating more water again. I tend to focus on fluids that are like coffee, iced coffee, like sparkling water, which is great. But
Mm,
also, I think I'm just not getting enough of plain water. So one of the things that kind of helps me is having this kind of measured water bottle to kind of keep me on track every couple of hours of the day.
mhm.
For me, it makes it more realistic to be able to just like, chug to the next water line if I'm a little bit behind. Instead of having to focus on like a whole liter of water, but not knowing how to break that down into small incremental chunks.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on right now.
Love
I'm
it.
still on track for the day as of right now, so that's good.
Yeah, I was
Um,
checking the time on that. It looks like you're
it's
bang on, I think.
it's at
Right?
11, but I just need to
Oh,
drink to the 12, and right now
you're
it's
almost
almost 12
there.
o'clock, so we're
That's
almost
really good.
there. Yeah.
That's really great. Yeah, honestly. Well, thanks for the discussion. A lot of this is, we do a little bit of like, talking through what the topics are going to be and what we're going to discuss. But I find every time we dive into it, it goes a little bit of a different direction. But I think it was a great one, great way to kick things off for season 2. Um, and so thank you all for listening to Reroute Reflections. If today's episode sparked something for you, a little tinkle, a question, an idea, or maybe even an opportunity for you to think about how to reroute yourself, we'd love to hear about it. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on Instagram if that's preferred, or you can just email me directly at andrew@rerouteconsulting.com. Uh, you can send your change stories as well, and we may select it as one of the cases that we go through with either ourselves or a guest. Again, through those same channels. If you found this helpful, or inspiring at all, can you do us a favor? Can you share this episode with one person who's navigating change right now, whether professionally or personally, or just somebody who you think will enjoy hearing our voices? And don't forget to subscribe. Leave a review if you enjoyed it. If you didn't like it, then disregard that last comment. And be sure to follow us on our socials. So LinkedIn, Instagram, and that's, I think, it. That's pretty much where we're at. The next time, our next episode, we're still kind of working through the details on. And so stay tuned on social media to see what a preview of what's to come next. Until then, just remember, don't be afraid to reroute.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.